Welcome to today's episode. Transportation and logistics have always depended on coordination, speed, and accuracy. Agentic AI offers the potential to take these capabilities to a new level, automating decisions and adapting to change in real time and creating smarter, more resilient networks. I'm Chris Gaffney from Georgia Tech Supply Chain and Logistics Institute, and I'm joined by Bryant Smith from Manhattan Associates. This conversation is part of our ongoing collaboration between Georgia Tech and Manhattan to explore the future of supply chain innovation. So welcome.
Thanks, Chris. I'm looking forward to the conversation. There's a buzz around the new technology, and ready to jump in and talk about some of our experience with this and how shippers are getting value out of this new technology.
So let's jump right in. So like a storm that's coming and you can hear the thunder from far off.
Yeah.
When did you first even hear the concept of an agent in the world that we live in from a supply chain technology?
Yeah, I mean, it had to have been late last year. Kind of the evolution, it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, and then it turned into generative AI, and I can start generating all this stuff for you. And then it turned into agentic AI, where I can actually do stuff on your behalf. So it's, as you said, it's been a tidal wave. It comes at you fast, and it's, how they say technology is ever evolving, rapidly evolving. I feel like even now it's at a breakneck pace.
Well, that's pretty much my ballpark. I would have said a year max, maybe last fall.
Yeah.
And in what's now approaching 12 months, I think probably an unbelievable, as you said, pace. With that pace comes wins and losses.
Yeah.
So from your standpoint, where do you see agents and agentic AI already showing kind of, as we talk about baseball terms, bunts and singles, getting on base, driving some value, and real promise in helping planners and analysts in this space?
Yeah, it's, different folks go headlong into new technology. They want to be early adopters, and, they really see the promise of where this is going. And then you have, some customers and some users who are, let's kind of wait and see, let's dip our toe in the water. As you mentioned, but bunts and singles it depends how risk averse your organization is. There's obviously a lot of power behind this technology in terms of automation, visibility, and those types of things. Where we've seen a lot of success is early on when we started providing these types of capabilities is we started first with a known data set and a known commodity, and let's say product documentation. So if a user was interacting with one of these agents or one of these chatbots, the user could just simply say, how do I configure this thing in the application? And what we would essentially do is take that prompt, go look at product documentation, provide that answer back to the user, and show them where we provided the documentation. That has value because if we didn't provide that experience, the user would have to look for a needle in a haystack. They'd have to sift through pages and pages of documentation just to find that answer. Now they can get it in less than a second and also get the reference of where it is. So that's a low risk way of providing value. But certainly there's a lot more advanced capabilities that these agents can provide in terms of recommendations, automation, and those types of things. So if you were a customer or a user and you wanted to take advantage of that, you certainly could. But there's different levels of variation for that.
In our warm-up, we were chatting, and in my experience, went through large TMS implementations when I was at Coke, and in my later years, we started going down the control tower path. Right, those were all big bets.
Yeah.
How do agents and agentic AI go beyond me just saying, hey, put this upgrade or put this feature in a future upgrade of the tool, and or help me, augment or build on a control tower that I've already been building? How are the agents different than those kind of things that people are traditionally familiar with?
Yeah, so like a control tower, in my experience, has been primarily visibility only, meaning it's showing you information that you may or may not care about, but it doesn't allow you to actually do anything about it. It'll tell you that you have potential late shipments, but you have to go somewhere else to actually do something about those shipments. Do I need to route them to a different carrier? Do I need to schedule a different delivery appointment? That's all done somewhere else. So with this new technology, especially with agentic AI, is not only is the agent scouring your network for that data, it's able to generate and surface that information for the end user, and then take it a step further and say, I recommend these actions based on the context of what's going on with this data set. So not only is it showing you what's going on, it's providing some level of intelligence to recommend an action. And then even so much further, you can have the agent do the action on your behalf. So, if you think about where, some of the old applications have been, is I see the data, I have to go over here to do something about it. Now I'm showing you the data, providing you a recommendation, and performing the action on your behalf.
Well, I was a transportation planner a long time ago, and I didn't actually have the benefit of a lot of technology. But I definitely look at these tools as they're coming and these capabilities and kind of have in my own mind what I wish I would have had, when I was in that space. There was always something. I remember even when we did our TMS implementation, I was like, how is the routing guide actually performing? Like, what's under the hood in terms of the health of that routing guide? And that was a very complex analysis. I assume that's a good example of something you could create an agent for that would highlight hotspots in your routing guide where it's not performing as it's supposed to, as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you're kind of getting into the reporting aspect of legacy TMSs. And again, doing some type of routing guide analysis took multiple steps, took multiple data inputs, and was kind of a cumbersome process to really understand the effectiveness of that routing guide and how it's performing. Those agents can do all those actions on your behalf, right? So not only does it have access to all of your lane data, it has access to all of your rating data, your carrier data, how they historically performed, and all those types of things. So instead of just spitting out a report with zero context, you actually have to decipher something. The agents are not only providing you the data, they're providing you recommendations on where you can improve. So if in a particular lane, you constantly fell to the second or third carrier on the routing guide, well, why was that? Well, you were giving them short lead time. You were never giving your primary carrier enough time to react to that tender. Well, the agent is now melding your routing guide performance with your tendering lead time, where that would have been a completely different report that you would have to build and merge the data together. So that's just another example of the contextual awareness of how you're performing on your routing guide and the recommendation that an agent can give you to help perform better.
Well, good. Well, we're going to pitch and catch today. So what kind of questions do you have for me?
So we've certainly heard a lot of buzz about these new technologies in the enterprise shipper space. I want to know, what are you hearing and seeing within the world of academia, the students that you're teaching? How are they thinking about this technology and how it can apply to some of their learnings?
I think the pace that you refer to from an agent standpoint is very similar to the pace of AI in academia. I've been at Georgia Tech now, and this is my second year, and last year was the first year we had an AI policy. When I talk to people about AI and supply chain, my take now is you should update your AI policy twice a year. It's moving that fast.
Wow.
And we actually saw one of our big industry partners make a mid-year change in their AI policy this year, which I think is very healthy. because they realized that the policy they put in place was slowing them down. I think in the context of academia, last year I sat in on a study amongst the faculty, and you had a bit of the old school faction and the younger faction of, we're going to destroy students' learning experience if we have this unfettered access to AI. And the more progressive folks said, these kids are going to go into industry. They need to understand how to use these tools for good and not evil. And that was kind of the level of discussion that we were having last year. And then the Institute policy for AI was just revised just prior to this semester. And it's much more progressive, right? It's still biased on data security and that type of thing. But it's much more of an encouraging use of the tools with the right context, with the right awareness. Like you have professors in a syllabus who may say, I'm going to be prescriptive on which assignments allow which use of AI and what level of disclosure. And in many cases, they're like, we want to see your prompt, kind of thing, which gets back to some of the discussions that you and I've had, and what we've written about is for all of the users. I don't think it's any different from a student or an industry user. Is I want to protect your critical thinking. I don't want you, that the article we just wrote was don't outsource your thinking, because that's the trap, right? It's one thing to say, I'm super busy, and if I had 5 full-time analysts, I got a bunch of stuff I would have them doing. But if I have agents that help me do that, then I can have at my fingertips with low latency all of the insights that I need in terms of better manage my network, my drivers, my facilities, whatever. It's that mindset that I hope we're coaching and seeing with students. Now, what I would also say, and I mentioned an example to you, is the students go so fast on their own. And so I think a lot of it is what you're doing with AI in the context of your classwork, but so many of these kids are involved in thinking about their next startup or that type of thing. What they're doing outside of class, I think, is something I watch more than anything.
So we have some customers, a fair percentage are adopting these new technologies. They see the value and the benefit. Where are we in terms of students adopting these new technologies to enhance their learning and not necessarily augment the classroom experience, but enhance it?
Yeah, we kind of, I mentor some students and I talk to lots of students. I would think at Georgia Tech, the percentage of students who are using the tools is like 90-some%, right? If it's not 100, it's really close. Most of them are very busy. But I mean, I gave an exam or a project last year, and the students had to give a presentation. They basically had to go learn supply chain of a global product and be able to describe it end to end, et cetera. I was shocked with the quality of the presentations they gave, because these were, fundamental kind of students in a freshman level class, but they knew all the tools that could help them go get the information and present the topic really well. Now, I coached them. I actually encouraged them to use AI, but I said, you need to make sure that you can defend what you're discussing. And some of them were better positioned than others to do that. So I think the use is pervasive. I think it's so hard to fight the tendency of, I'm just so busy, let me just let this work get done. So I think we have a lot of work to continue to do to say, make sure that you've done the work.
Yeah.
So,
and we had talked about this before, and a lot of the quality of the output is related to the quality of the input. So even when a student is doing their research, and they might be using some of these tools to get more information from more sources and those types of things, how are you educating the students to say, the critical thinking of that output isn't quite right? And how do I groom the input and the scholarly articles that are feeding some of this research?
Yeah, we had 2 grad students who had PhD students who worked on a project with us that was a transportation related project, but it involved understanding ocean transit plus port performance plus transload plus rail performance. And one of the students had no prior experience with this space of our supply chains. And she was the one doing most of the data heavy work. And what I found was we had to literally do a lot of explaining around how the industry actually works, what goes on, that type of thing, in order for her to improve her own error checking of what she was bringing forward and that type of thing. I mean, she went into detail and ultimately understood the dynamics of how container ships go through the Panama Canal. She didn't understand that. And so she saw a bunch of anomalies. And then it's not hard to go, how does this actually work, right?
Yeah.
Whether they queue up at one end and they, go through, some of them stop at a port on either side of Panama. But I mean, I think that's the push for us with folks, is understand the context.
And, the critical thinking on the back end to make sure that, the outputs are accurate. The same thing can be said when you're in industry too, right? Is if you have bad data being fed into these tools, you're going to get bad data out, which means you could potentially have bad recommendations coming from these tools, right? And they really need to have that critical thinking and review that output of these tools to make sure that they're right. You don't want to have to go and make decisions based on bad data.
It's interesting, before AI, the term that I recalled in industry was advanced analytics. And at Coke, in my last few years there, we started bringing in a lot of data scientists, right? That was a new capability. And we said, we need to bring these people in. And they were, highly skilled. And whether we brought in Atlanta, 100 of them, a year or two later, very few were left. And there were a number of reasons why that occurred. But one of them was these folks, whether they had a master's degree or whatever, found themselves spending so much time doing data cleansing that they were like, this is not what I went to school to study. So I actually think it's a great application for AI. And, one of the folks I know who kind of did a large investigation last year, this was their first actual implementation, was kind of always on data cleansing. So that's always been an issue for us. So as you coach clients, where does that sit in terms of, if you want this to work well, things you got to do first?
Yeah, and that was true even before this new technology. Is if you're working with bad data, you're going to have bad outputs. You're also going to be making suboptimal decisions, because you're either working with an incomplete data set or you're working with a bad data set. And when margins are so thin in some of these industries, you really can't afford to make poor decisions, because it'll be very costly.
Yeah.
So a lot of our mantra, especially when they're adopting these new technologies, is make sure you have a good foundation with the data and architecture to make sure that you're getting the value that not only the application can provide, but also these new technologies like Agentic AI. The agent is using that data to either perform an action, provide a recommendation, or even provide our part of the decision-making process. So if you're feeding bad data with these agents, you're going to get that output. So that's something we, of course, preach to a lot of our customers in industry.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Manifest, one of the large, events in the industry early this year, and that was the theme. Now, there are lots of folks who said, well, with AI, I don't have to clean my data. My AI can do it for me. Whether that's true or false, I don't know. But I do think that that awareness and that commitment to master data management and that cleansing of data, I think is just fundamental to really make the most of this.
Absolutely. So assuming that you have clean data, what's the benefit? What can these agents do to provide value for organizations? It's something that we've been talking about. And I think there's still a lot of manual processes that people do on a daily basis, over and over and over again. And I think some of the promise of agentic AI is related to process automation. the agents can really perform the actions on behalf of the user, especially if they're mundane, repeatable tasks. There's relatively low risk for an agent to do those tasks on behalf of the user. So now you start gaining efficiencies from the resources that you have. And it allows you and a customer to grow and do more things with the resources that you already have, not only from a technology perspective, but from a people perspective as well. They're not going through and doing the manual clicks and ticks. The agents are performing those actions on behalf of those users.
Yeah, I would say I was a planner, I was an analyst, and then I managed lots of planners and analysts. And what I believe to still be the case is lots of planners don't spend a lot of their time planning, and lots of analysts don't spend a lot of their time doing analysis. So if you can increase that throw weight against what people are supposed to bring their intellectual capability to, I think you win. A study I saw last year said the average supply chain person has 20 hours of non-value added work in their week. And I've tested that with lots of people. I don't have too many claim below 10 in that regard. So if you can improve the quality, I think that's, that's another analogy I had from the time I was in school to the time I was at work. I said, when I was in school and I had to take 4 or 5 classes, I won't tell you I took 6 or 8 once or twice, but I don't recommend it. I could really focus and feel like I could give my best. But once I was in industry, there were so many things competing for my time. I was like, I'm not sure I'm giving intellectual effort to everything. And my hope is that agents and agentic AI will frame that way, allow people to do their best in more settings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about what the load planner does today is, at least from an execution perspective, they're looking through their shipments and seeing which ones are early, which ones are late, and which ones are on time. Well, an agent can do that. They can scour your network to see what are potential early, potential late, and on times. And if something is late, maybe I need to get another carrier, go deeper in my routing guide, maybe schedule a delivery appointment. That's something an agent can do also. It can schedule the next available delivery appointment. So stop doing all these low value actions that take up a lot of time. Supplement that with some of the agentic AI technology, and that frees you up to do more strategic things.
Yeah, I think that, that's the coaching that I give to people is I think you got to get in the pool here. You got to be, you could choose to be in the shallow end, and you could stay in the shallow end for a fair amount of time. And the kind of things you're talking about are pretty low risk, if not zero risk, and increasingly creating value. I mean, it can be a harried exercise to go to the trouble of getting tenders done. You know who's going to do it, but then the appointmenting, get it wrong. I recall many cases where we call and they say, appointments for that day were open as of 8 a.m. You called at 10, there are no appointments left, and then you've got a whole rework kind of scenario. So I think that's attractive. I'm curious from your perspective, do you have a sense yet in terms of the change management and adoption of the user for this? Do you have a sense of whether, this is being foisted upon users by senior folks, or the users are clamoring, for this type of capability?
I think it's both. You have some users who are, they're sick of the mundane and they want to outsource some of that mundane work. And then you have some people who enjoy what they do and they don't want anyone touching it, type of thing. So I think the promise and the value that's coming is, people will see that the value is there. So they'll start to adopt that technology in that way. But part of this is going to come down to trust, right? If you're going to have agents performing actions on your behalf, you want to make sure they're doing the right actions, but also you need to monitor them. So we're already starting to see, how can we better summarize what is going on within the platform itself, especially when a process is being automated. So I'll give you an example. Is I need a dashboard to see what have the agents done on my behalf. Just give me a summary, reschedule this delivery appointment, assign a new carrier, so on and so forth. So I can kind of see it as like a a scrolling social media feed of activity, what's going on. That kind of resonates with what's going on with people coming into industry. Is they're used to that news feed where they're just scrolling through and seeing what's happening. But also, right next to it, if an agent couldn't perform an action and didn't know what to do, or something was out of tolerance or required manual user intervention, I have that right there, then and there too. This needs your attention. I recommend you do this. So that's going to really change not only the experience of interacting with the application, but also is building up the trust with the end user that these agents are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
One of the things that I think is interesting is we're leading down the tendency or the desire where the agent can act, right? And you mentioned it in the context of control towers. And I recall some research that we did at Coke. Again, it's more than 5 years ago now, and it was looking at Amazon and Walmart. And one of the quotes we had was, "We will not invest in any control towering that's all rear view mirror. Everything needs to aspire to be descriptive or prescriptive." And I sense the ability to make that happen was somewhat limited until we get into the world of agentic, right? That capability may not have existed. Now it's here. But you comment on decision rights, and for me, it's a question of, what's the decision right of the agent, but what's the decision rights of the user as well? I think there's work to be done in that space, because part of this whole premise is it's a firefight on a daily basis, and we need people equipped to make decisions on the spot, whether they're human or whether they're enabled by AI. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, decision support is certainly variable. And this goes back to risk, right? Is if they're making decisions or recommendations, it's a lower risk to provide recommendations on an appointment versus providing recommendations on a freight invoice, which actually has monetary value. Now, don't get me wrong, appointments, they have value, they drive the organization, but if you get the appointment scheduling wrong, it's not going to impact the business too much. If you get the invoicing and payments wrong, it's definitely going to impact the organization. So decision support, you'll see they'll push agents to do more of the less risky decisions, and the users still have oversight over the critical decisions.
No, I like that. I think, as I advocate to people, I advocate, you ought to have a policy around this. And that policy can give you those guardrails and that type of thing. My sense now is people also need a roadmap around this, right? And so I guess this is year zero for most companies when it comes to agents. But as you think about it, if you're guiding clients who are not first to the party, what do you say about how they should think about building out their own kind of roadmap for their journey when it comes to agentic AI?
Yeah, I think first you got to start with a foundational understanding of the capabilities. Is if you don't really know the value and the capabilities that these tools can provide, then you're already behind. Mm-hmm. I think having a good foundation, having a good understanding of the capabilities is the starting point. But then you also need to think, what's the end goal? What am I trying to accomplish? And having that end state in mind is going to help you chart the journey, and it's going to help you chart the roadmap of how you're going to get there. So start with the start with the foundation, look at the end goal, and then plot the course in the middle.
I mean, I'll say I'm old school in some respects, but this is ultimately a design, planning, and execution world, right? I've got to design my network, and then once I've got an understanding of what my network is, I've got a plan so that I fulfill demand using the assets that I have, and then I've got to make sure that that plan actually occurs, in real time. And the way I think about it is there's always been slippage between design and plan and execution, and I want the tools to help me make a better plan, and I want the tools to create a smaller gap between plan and execution. I don't know. Is that an oversimplification of one way to think about this?
No, that's absolutely right. And I think, a lot of that value is these tools will provide those recommendations, especially where the slippage occurs. So again, having some trust in the model, but this also goes back to re-evaluating plans. And you and I had talked about, the policies that the university rolls out to the rest of the community in terms of what's our policy for this. Well, that should be reviewed quite frequently,
Yep.
right? Especially with how rapid the technology is evolving. The same thing is true when you're using these tools in industry. You need to have a plan and review that plan on a frequent basis to make sure that you're on track. Because as I mentioned, if you're stating your end goal, where do you want to be, that end goal can change 6 months from now. So you need to constantly review, how are these tools helping you get where you want to go?
We're getting close to the end here, and I always want to kind of think about how we give people advice. Again, we're less than 12 months into this journey. The smartest people started this journey 12 months ago. Maybe if you were really prescient, you saw something last summer. But if you're watching this and you're like, we're behind the power curve or the 8-ball here, what are the smartest first steps that somebody could take in this space and say, I can't be more than a year behind, so what do I do so that I'm moving very smartly from here forward?
Yeah, I mean, most people have a network of peers that they can interact with. See what your peers are doing and learn from their mistakes. Ask them what worked well, what didn't work well, and see if you can apply that back in your own organization. Another good first step is understanding the tools themselves. Is what are the capabilities that these tools can provide? Where will they provide value within my organization? And how could I apply them within certain areas, certain departments? And then lastly, you and I had talked about the data. A lot of these technologies are leveraging the data to do certain things. So take a look at your data. Make sure your data is clean, make sure it's complete, because no matter what technology you're going to be using, it's going to be using that data to advance the organization.
Yeah, I recall a very old commercial that I somehow stuck in my brain from when I was a kid, and it was the tagline was, "An educated consumer is our best customer." I think when it comes to agentic AI, you really do need to be an educated consumer, right? If you're a leader in your organization, this is a source. We're always struggling for innovation. We're always struggling for productivity. This is as good a lever as anything right now, but I think you've got to build your own brain. I would also say this is a great time to be a fast follower. There's so much communication that's out there. I listened to a podcast and it was talking about what occurred in another country, and it was an entire ecosystem between the manufacturer and their suppliers, and it was a constant open channel saying, what are you experimenting on? What's working? What's not? So that you can kind of bootstrap yourself amongst your peers. And I think there are things that can be done in that space, whether you're behind the curve or whether you're on the curve. It's just moving so fast. I think you've just got to be plugged in. I think leveraging your technology partnership, leveraging your own ecosystem is a simple way to do that. We obviously would say leveraging your academic partners as well.
Exactly.
So, super. Well, this has been a fine conversation.
Yeah.
I love it. I always learn a bit, and this is a nice way to kind of satisfy my curiosity in this space. So I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation and looking forward to the next one.
Awesome.